Hey everybody. Morning. I had uh I had hoped we didn't have to do more of these morning chats where the fate of the nation was on the line. Oh, it's a massive mess. Um I really didn't want to do this particular chat, and I'll explain why here in a few minutes. But today was like one of those days where I was sitting here watching the news and the coverage of this stuff, and I read this morning that Trump has been calling local election officials, uh, local Republican election officials, and sort of glad handing them and sort of pressuring isn't the right word, but sort of massaging them and sort of like chatting them up, trying to get them to not certify election results. And I've been talking about this a lot as sort of a work and a grift, and which is still true, but it is working itself into a shoot, as I had discussed in wrestling terms. It's becoming more real by the day, and on top of that, it's escalating, and it's becoming part of right wing mythology, and it's becoming more and more of conventional wisdom on the right. Uh, I just want to state before I move forward that this is absolutely a coup. People have to start calling it that. It's a coup d'état. Period. Whether or not it's half-hearted, whether or not it's whether or not it is a competent effort, these are different things to talk about. But it's gaining momentum, and it's becoming more insidious by the day. And the fact that the Republican Party and the right are so complicit in this thing, whether it's haphazard or real or a grift or whatever. It's becoming real, even if it was meant in jest or to save face or as a fundraising grift. It's becoming real, and I didn't want to do this talk. Because and I want to. I guess I guess I didn't want to do this talk because inside baseball sucks. I had talked about how I didn't want to talk about palace intrigue, how I didn't want to get into the minutia of like the world of Trump or politics, and I certainly didn't want to start talking about media. But we're at a point where we have to talk about media, and we have to talk about motivations. We have to talk about why the news is covered the way that it is. We need to talk about why people are so hesitant to call an obvious coup a coup. There's a lot of hand wringing. Well, technically, a coup d'etat, blah, blah, blah. No, it's a coup. It's a coup. It's a coup attempt. Doesn't mean it's going to work. Doesn't mean that it's competent. Doesn't mean that they have a legal leg to stand on, which, by the way, is not a coup. If you have a legal leg to stand on, it's not a coup. This is a coup. There is no legality to this. It is simply trying to steal an election in order to maintain power. But again, I don't like talking inside baseball, and I hope that you will grant me a little bit of leeway and patience as I talk about this. I started my media career, political career, by accident. I started covering Donald Trump's rallies back in 2016. Well, I guess 2015 technically, but where anybody would have gave a damn what I was doing. It was in 2016, and I was just a dude, and I was going into Trump's rallies, and they talked to me because, I mean, come on, I put on the right clothes, I looked like a Trump supporter, and they would talk to me freely and openly and tell me what they believed and what they wanted. And back in 2016, I was telling everybody, like, all Trump supporters wanted to talk about was they wanted to talk about conspiracy theories. They were saying a ton of racist shit, and they were talking about fascism. I mean, they were talking about wanting to lock up their enemies. They were wanting to. I mean, people would tell me about lobotomies, forcefully lobotomizing, people in the media and executing them, and rounding up people of color and communist or whatever in the hell it was at the moment. Like, they were telling me this every day that I would go to these rallies, and you know back then, when I started covering Trump's rallies, this was back in the day when they still treated him like entertainment. And, he would go up to speak, and they would just put a camera up on him, and they would just show him because he got incredible ratings. It was just nuts, the things that he was saying on the stage, and they treated it like entertainment, and this was every news organization. And all these networks and stuff, their reporters and the coverage was in a pin, like away from the stage, and so they just sort of like watched it. And this was before the crowds were like harassing the people in the pins. Then all of a sudden people cared. All of a sudden they started caring when the reporters started getting yelled at. But what I was doing is I was going in with the supporters and talking to them and overhearing them and reporting on what was said. And that was the moment where I was like, listen, people need to understand that this Trump thing isn't entertainment. This isn't a joke. People are gathering to it. It's building momentum. This is a really dangerous movement. Uh, that's when I sort of got a platform. So I get this platform because I'm like one of the first people doing this. I wasn't the only person doing it, but I was like one of the first people doing it. And it caught fire online on social media. And, I got asked to write for the New York Times. I got asked to write for the New Republic, like all these places, just to talk about what I'd seen, what I'd gone through, what had happened. And I want to talk a little bit. And again, I'm very grateful for you for having patience for me talking about this and insider media stuff. The way that the media particularly works right now is it's very much a gig economy model, particularly if you're an independent journalist, particularly if you don't have a full-time gig. Like, I'm not turning in a column once a week. I'm not writing once a day. I'm not getting a salary from these people. They can cut off a reporter or a writer or an analyst or a pundit at any moment. And one of the things that has been happening, because the way the media is set up, and by the way, that's publications, that's cable news outlets, that's all of them. They have to maintain respectability, right? They have to. There's a narrow breadth of stuff that you can cover and you can talk about, and you can talk about Trump's more dangerous aspects. And this is one of the things I'm sure has frustrated a lot of you, the way that they've talked about Trump. And they're like, it appears that he might have misled people. They don't want to call it a lie, because lie is a subjective term, right? It means that the media has made a decision. Or, a divisive racial comment. A lot of these sort of maneuverings to try and cover the horror that is Trump, while not really getting into what's happening and sort of keeping a distance. I started calling Trump fascism back in 2016. And I started talking about the threat of Trumpism back in 2016. There was a difference between the gigs that I got between when I was just covering this stuff and talking about what I saw and what I heard, and when I started calling it out for the threat that it was. The point is, for years, people like myself, people like Sarah Kinzier, Snyder, A lot of people. Wajahat Ali has been doing a great job on this stuff too. Uh, those of us who have called this out, a lot of the times, I'm sorry, but the phone calls and the gigs start drying up when you start calling it what it is. There is within our media and within our political system, because I have to tell you that there are a lot of politicians who know better right now, who are not calling this what it is. There are incentives in the system. Just hold out on this stuff a little bit. Just be careful. Let's be a little bit more careful on what how we pick and choose what we say. There's a status quo bias within our media. You've seen this change. It moves at a glacial pace. This is one of the reasons why the networks at this point are like, Trump is lying. And obviously Trump was being a racist. It took years to get to the point where they would even call racism, or they would call a lie a lie. They don't want to sound the alarm on a coup, because to sound an alarm on a coup is to sound alarmist, and it's to move outside of that narrow scope. To move outside of that narrow scope of respectability. We are respectabilitying ourselves into incredible danger, and we've been doing it for years. Because people wanted to explain that Trumpism was just populism. That's all it is. And yeah, populism can be scary sometimes, when people get really excited and worked up about stuff. It's not what it was. This has been fascism from the very beginning. It's a different type of fascism. We're watching a coup d'etat in this country. Whether it will be successful or not, whether it's competent or not, these are not what we're talking about. Yeah, Jason Stanley's book, How Fascism Works, really good book. Federico Finkelstein's Brief History of Fascist Lies, required reading right now too. He was on the McCraig podcast not too long ago. Good interview, good guy. We are watching a coup d'etat take place. Whether it works or not is a different story. I talked about this yesterday when I did a live stream. Look at all the people who are up for it. The Republican Party's fine with it. You have a sitting senator in Lindsey Graham who's interfering in elections and asking people to disenfranchise and throw away votes. You've got an entire party that's fine with it, who's just sitting by the side or actively full-throatedly doing it. Then you've got an entire media ecosystem. And by the way, this is the difference between what you would call mainstream media or center-left media or center media and right-wing media. Fox News isn't worried about this stuff. They still have their own respectability. Like, they're not going to report on QAnon as if it's absolutely factual. That's sort of their line. They'll flirt around with QAnon, which, by the way, is the reason why OANN and Newsmax are now coming into fruition as competitors, is because they're even more shameless than Fox News. The right wing doesn't worry about this stuff. They're reactionary, so they're not worried about seeming alarmist. That's their brand. Is alarmist. There's war on Christmas. There's a war on Thanksgiving. They're coming for you. They're changing America. There's a fundamental change in America. Barack Obama is a secret Muslim socialist. The center-left media, the stuff that you are familiar with, the places that should be sounding the alarm, that should be treating this with the emphasis and talking about the danger that is happening right now. They're terrified of it. They don't want to call it what it is. And in a large part, it's because they think the system's going to figure itself out. Most of the people who are in charge of covering this thing are wealthy and privileged. They believe that the system works. I mean, how could it not work? Look where they got. It stands in as a symbol and a metaphor for what they've been able to do. Meanwhile, people who don't come from wealth, like myself, people who come from vulnerable populations, like people of color, they are saying, listen, this thing is really, really bad. It's already cost lives. It's already led to a worsening of life and constant threats and harassment in this country. People who are covering this want to keep their jobs too. This, right now, on all fronts, is an economically pushed crisis. We have an actual coup happening in this country. On the right, there's an economic incentive for all the people on the right to go along with this thing and push it and elevate it and just continue riding it into the sunset, however long it takes to get them power and wealth and opportunity. Center left, there's an economic incentive not to call it a coup and not to call out the bad behavior. This is why when you turn on a lot of news or you read a lot of news, it's mostly about a transition that right now is completely in doubt. Joe Biden isn't mentioning this stuff. And that's a story for a different day. Maybe Biden shouldn't be talking about this stuff. Maybe he should. I kind of think maybe he should, but there's an argument to be made. Joe Biden came out and said, I haven't been able to talk to anybody about the coronavirus. It's setting us back by weeks, if not months, if not years, because I'm not able to get this information. That's as much as you're probably going to hear from the president-elect on this, although I think there's probably a responsibility to talk more about it. But the media and the pundits and our politicians are failing on this. Again, I didn't want to talk about it. I did not want to talk about this shit because, listen, talking about insider media stuff, oh my God, leave that to Twitter and cocktail parties. Whenever in the hell we can go back to cocktail parties, which I've never actually gone to a cocktail party. Sounds boring as hell. Ugh. I'd sit outside and drink a beer. Cocktail parties with a bunch of like rich, powerful, incentive people in New York City and Washington, D.C. Oh, that sounds awful. But that's what it is. This is an entire little ecosystem that has an economic incentive not to call this out for the danger that it is, which is why they've been failing on Trump all along. A lot of them work right alongside Republicans and depend on them for access. They didn't want to call this out for the white supremacist, fascistic movement that it is. Yeah, exactly. John just brought up that Michigan county official wants to rescind her certification vote was called directly by Trump. He's out there lobbying for people to overturn election results. Again, I don't want to talk about this, but you need to know what's going on. You need to know what's happening here. There's an economic incentive. Personally, and by the way, I can only talk about what I've been able to do. I'm not going to name names of the people I've talked to, but I know a lot of people who talk about this stuff, who call Trump out for the fascist authoritarian that he is, who call this a coup, who have been doing it for years, talking about foreign interference, talking about neo-fascism growing around the world. A lot of them have watched opportunities dry up. They stopped getting invited on TV. They stopped getting publications. It's economic incentive, and it pushes towards the status quo. You can say some provocative things about Donald Trump. You can say some provocative things about the Republican Party. You can say some provocative things about the state of play in America, both economically and politically. You got to be very careful. You can sort of trouble the border a little bit. But if you're not careful, you stop getting those invites. You stop getting those publications. All of a sudden, you're persona non grata. So what we're watching right now on both sides, on the left, on the center, on the right, on the independent, whatever you want to call it, it pays to not get outside the lines. It pays not to go outside the lines. That's why they're not calling it the coup that it is. It's a coup. It's a coup d'etat. And people need to stop being afraid to call it what it is, especially before something breaks through and it works. Because again, this might not work out for Trump. Probably won't. It's really a slap-happy, haphazard, bullshit, stupid coup, and they're really untalented. And again, I said this yesterday on the live stream, like, if it was closer, if the election was closer, and if it was just like one thing that needed to be proved or one state that needed to be overturned, like, it would be a lot closer to happening, which, by the way, we dodged a bullet. We dodged a bullet on that one. So it's probably not going to work. But I'm telling you right now, it's radicalizing a lot of different people. It's radicalizing a lot of different people. And it's pushing the right wing. And by the way, Fox is chasing Newsmax and OANN right now. It's getting worse. Fox right now is chasing the economics incentive of getting worse. Meanwhile, the QAnon people, the white terrorists, the white supremacists, the radical fringe on the right, those people really truly believe that they're now involved in an invisible war. And when people believe they're involved in an invisible war, they act out. They carry out violence. They bomb buildings. They attack people. They murder people. The temperature in this country is rising and rising and rising. And on top of that, it's going to more or less hinder everything that Joe Biden could possibly do. It's going to lead to more radicalization and violence and more culture wars, which is just a fancy way of talking about a cold civil war. It's bad. And here's the thing. Somebody's asking, what can we do? It's getting near the get in the streets and protest time. It's getting near grassroots movement time, because if it works at any time and a valid vote gets thrown out, like if any of these calls by Trump works, if the Republican Party somehow or another manages to even throw out a handful of ballots, it's get in the street time. But I have to tell you, we have to start by calling this a coup, because the Republican Party is acting with impunity. I'm sure you're tired of it. I'm tired of it. These stories that are like, oh, well, we know that Joe Biden won, but we're just letting Trump work out his feelings. Bullshit. You're doing this for the economic and political advantage that it gives you to tell people that you are actually the majority and you won an election. And they're trying to do it to win the special elections in Georgia. They're doing it to try and fundraise. They're trying to do it to keep their base intact. So you have to start calling it a coup. You have to take away that, well, we're letting Don work it out. I mean, he's a very sensitive little boy. We have to start calling it a coup. We have to start calling this what it is, because these people have been hiding behind extremist, radical agendas for years. I'm so tired of it too. I'm so tired of this shit. I don't want to have to get on here and do this every single day. I like hanging out with y'all. Y'all are wonderful, but I don't want to get on here and do this every single day. It's awful. Awful. It's just absolutely awful, and we deserve better. And we deserve a country that works and takes care of our business, and where people aren't more worried about, their nest eggs and their social relationships and whether or not they're going to get invited to parties, if there are ever parties again, considering this country just hit 250,000 dead officially. That's not even like the total of it. Start calling it out. It's a coup. Start calling out the people who aren't willing to call it a coup. It's time. It's time to stop letting these people hide behind their economic priorities and their political priorities. It's time. All right. Thank you for letting me get that off my chest. Yeah. Really irritates the living hell out of me. Let's try and have a decent Thursday. Let's try and beat this thing back. Let's call it what it is, and let's save this country, and let's do it. There'll be a new Muckrake podcast tomorrow. Nick and I are going to talk about this. Yeah, Sunday night I'll do a bourbon talk at 8 p.m. I don't know. I don't want to have to keep doing these. I'll do updates as long as everything's in danger. Cheers, everyone. Be safe.